German Shepherd chained in the storm. What rescuers uncovered left everyone crying. The storm screamed across the empty street, tearing down signs and slamming rain like knives into the ground. Amid the chaos, a metallic clatter rose above. The thunder, the desperate rattle of chains. Half hidden behind a crumbling wall, a German Shepherd strained against rusted links wrapped cruelly around his neck. Every gust whipped his soaked fur flat, his ribs jerking as he fought to breathe. The chains dug deeper, cutting red welts into his skin, anchoring him to a post that swayed dangerously with each strike of wind. He barked, but the sound was swallowed by the storm, a broken cry no one should have heard. Lightning flashed, illuminating his terrified eyes locked not on freedom, but on something in the darkness beyond him. If this moment already broke your heart, pause and tell us where you're watching from. Because what comes next will stay with you forever. That night, the city had already been evacuated. Streets once alive with traffic and neon were now a battlefield of wind and water. Only emergency teams moved through the ruins, searching for survivors left behind. Among them was Captain Luis, a veteran firefighter whose instincts rarely failed him. As he guided his team down a narrow street, the storm nearly drowned every sound. But then, between thunderclaps, he caught it. A metallic rattle, irregular, frantic. Luis signaled, pushing through fallen debris until the beam of his flashlight froze on the site. The shepherd's body jerked violently against the chain, water swirling at his legs. His paws slipped endlessly on the wet concrete, each attempt weaker, his throat rasping as the collar bit deep. But what stopped Luis cold wasn't only the suffering. It was the way the dog's gaze kept flicking beyond him, toward the ruined building behind. Luis shouted orders. 2 rescuers rushed forward, trying to pry the chain loose, but it was padlocked, fused by rust and years of neglect. The storm howled harder, pressing them to hurry. Then Marta, his second in command, stumbled on something. Half buried in the mud near the dog's paws was a torn jacket, shredded by wind, its fabric clinging to the post, and stitched faintly on the inside was an emblem, a police badge, faded but unmistakable. This wasn't just a stray. This shepherd had once been trained, uniformed, and paired with someone who wore that jacket. Which raised a haunting question. Where was that handler now, and why had the dog been left to die, chained in the storm? The realization hit Luis like the wind itself. A K9 abandoned here, chained deliberately, meant more than cruelty. It meant someone wanted him silenced. The shepherd thrashed again, his paws striking the mud, water splashing high as the storm threatened to sweep debris across him. Marta pulled at the chain with bolt cutters, sparks flying as metal resisted. "It's fused! This isn't accidental!" she shouted over the gale. Suddenly a crash echoed from the collapsed building. Behind them, Luis spun his light toward the rubble. For an instant he swore he saw movement, a hand, or just the storm twisting shadows. The shepherd barked hoarsely, dragging his chain toward the ruins as if demanding they look closer. Luis's gut tightened. Either someone was trapped inside, or the dog was guarding something hidden deliberately beneath the wreckage. Time ticked like a drum. The wall holding the chain was starting to crumble, every gust loosening its foundation. If it gave way, the shepherd would be dragged under collapsing stone. The team faced a split-second decision. Cut the dog free first or check the ruins he seemed desperate to protect. And with the storm raging louder, Luis knew whichever choice he made could uncover a truth too heavy for any rescuer to carry. The bolt cutters screeched again, but the chain refused to break. Rain stung Luis's face as he crouched lower, his flashlight beam catching the shepherd's trembling muzzle. The dog wasn't just fighting the storm. He was fixated, straining toward the collapsed building as though his life depended on it. Luis shouted for silence. Beneath the storm's roar, a faint sound carried from the rubble. Not wind, not stone shifting. A muffled cry. Marta froze. Someone's in there. Luis's chest tightened. This explained everything. The shepherd hadn't been abandoned. He had been left chained as a marker, a guardian. The shredded jacket, the police emblem, the dog's desperate eyes, All pointed to one possibility. His handler was buried alive. Sighed. The dog barked, hoarse but relentless, pulling at the chain until blood streaked his neck. Luis's decision became painfully clear. Freeing the dog wasn't just about saving an animal, it was the key to saving a human life. But time was merciless. The wall anchoring the chain trembled, cracks splitting wider with each gust. If it collapsed, both the shepherd and whoever lay inside would be crushed. Lightning split the sky as Marta drove the bolt cutters into the chain one final time. Metal groaned, sparks flashed, and at last the rusted links snapped. The shepherd lunged forward, nearly dragging Luis off his feet, barking toward the ruins with a ferocity that defied his exhaustion. The team followed as the dog clawed through rubble, his nose pressed into cracks between broken beams. Luis dropped to his knees, shoving stones aside, until his fingers brushed damp fabric. A hand, cold, but moving. "Alive!" he shouted. The rescuers surged forward, forming a human chain against the collapsing wall. The shepherd whimpered, shoving his head into the gap, refusing to move until Luis pulled the unconscious figure free. It was a man, uniform shredded, skin pale, but breathing faintly. Around his neck hung the matching badge to the emblem in the A. Torn jacket. This was the handler, the one the shepherd had refused to abandon even as the storm tried to bury them both. But the wall gave a final shudder. Stones tumbled, crashing where they had just been. Luis shielded the handler with his body as the team dragged them clear. The shepherd collapsed beside his partner, chest heaving, eyes fluttering shut. Hours later, the clinic was filled with the low hum of machines. The handler lay pale under blankets, oxygen mask fogging with each shallow breath. Beside him, the shepherd rested on a padded mat, IV line taped to his paw, his body trembling from exhaustion. Luis stood between them, drenched clothes clinging to his skin, watching the fragile monitor lights flicker. The vet adjusted settings, his tone urgent but calm. Both critical. But the bond between them, it may be what pulls them through. The shepherd stirred, his head lifting weakly. His eyes found the handler, a soft whine escaping his throat. The man's hand twitched in response, reaching instinctively toward the sound. In that silent exchange, loyalty spoke louder than any words. Machines could fight for their lives, but only their unbroken bond could decide if morning would come for them both. Dawn broke slowly, clouds drifting apart to reveal a pale sky washed clean by the storm. Inside the clinic, the worst had passed. The handler stirred, his breathing deeper now, though his body was still weak. Beside him, the shepherd lifted his head from the mat, ears flicking as though sensing the shift. When the handler's eyes fluttered open, the first thing he saw wasn't the ceiling or the doctors, but his dog, wagging his tail faintly despite the IV still taped to his paw. Tears welled in the man's eyes as he reached out, fingers brushing fur he thought he'd never feel again. Luis watched quietly from the doorway. He had seen countless rescues, but few as profound as this. 2 lives tethered not by duty, but by loyalty that no storm could sever, yet questions remained. Who had left the shepherd chained in the storm, and why? Was it neglect or something darker buried with that collapsing wall? For now, answers could wait. What mattered most was that man and dog had survived together, proving that even against the storm's rage, loyalty had the final word.